Hi, this is Sweet Life and I'm Natasha, back at it with a discussion of Hero. Hero is a 2002 martial arts film starring Jet Li as Nameless, a fighter who's invited to share a drink in his story with the king after defeating 3 of the king's would-be assassins. The king has waged war hoping to gain control of the 6 local states to create a unified empire under his leadership. Desiring to remain independent, skilled assassins from the various states have made attempts to kill the king. To keep himself safe while on his quest for unification, the king has implemented a rule that none but his closest advisors and servants are to come within 100 paces of him. Yet he allows Nameless to advance 10 paces at a time as he recounts how he defeated each of the assassins. For March, I had a theme going of reviewing martial arts movies, so like Martial Arts March. And I remembered years ago when Hero came out watching it and thinking that it was really good. I liked it to the point where it's now part of my DVD collection. And so I decided to watch it again. I don't remember if I was previously aware, but I was pretty surprised when I picked up the DVD this time around and noticed Quentin Tarantino's name on the cover, as I'm really not the biggest fan of his movies. Turns out that he actually played a role in helping to get the film released in America, and for that, I thank him. Hero is visually stunning. The story is great and the acting is good as well. It just came together to be a very good movie. First off, the fight scenes are incredible as far as the action and the choreography. Once again, the only drawback for me in some of the fight scenes is like the flying type stuff. I know that this form of martial arts film, there's like a bit of fantasy to it. You'll find with the wire work, they'll have like these overly dramatized jumps and flips where it goes beyond what's humanly possible to the point where the characters pretty much look like they're flying. And within the context of these martial arts movies, it's just something that I don't really like. But it's a minor pet peeve, not the end of the world. It happens in a few scenes here, but it's not so disruptive to the point where it would make me write off the movie completely. But aside from that, the fight scenes are incredible. You have a really good mix here of action, drama, good dialogue, and it just makes for an overall very enjoyable movie. One of the things that really stands out to me that I think is actually quite impressive is when you look at the scale of some of these scenes. There's actually at a few points in the movie scenes where you have the king and his army, which has a large amount of archers. At points, you see where it's like arrows are just raining down, right? Because the archers are just firing off these arrows and there's so many of them. Granted, I didn't watch the behind the scenes making of the movie to see if maybe it was like CGI or they just had a lot of extras, but the scale of when you see these arrows raining down, crazy. In addition to that, you have like these one-on-one fight scenes where it's one person versus an opponent. Quite often, Jet Li's character Nameless versus some other opponent. And they're engaging in hand-to-hand combat, but more often sword fighting. The action between the characters is exciting, but I also enjoyed the scenery and costumes in these fight scenes with just like the 2 or 3 characters. They're dressed in these flowing outfits with what looks like scarves or like loose fabric that helps to dramatize their movements. So when they thrust a sword forward or flip back, the movement is extra dramatic. It adds flair to whatever moves they make, which makes the fight sequences more visually interesting. There are quite a few scenes like this that are really enjoyable where the scenery and the use of color helps to add to the action. For example, later on in the film, there's a flashback scene where the king and one of the would-be assassins are having this fight. They're what looks like silk or satin, but whatever the material, green curtains hanging, and they move in between them as they're fighting, right? The air is moving or like a light wind that's blowing the fabric, and it becomes part of the fight sequence. In another scene, they're fighting in the desert, and then in a room with what looks like, I think it's like bundled arrows, right? And they're all dressed in white. There's a version of the scene that's almost black and white with a monotone kind of vibe, and their costumes match the background. So in addition to the fighting and dialogue that's taking place, the scenery becomes part of the story as well. There's a scene early on in the movie where Nameless and one of the assassins, Sky, are fighting in the courtyard of one of these like old school Chinese village looking house things. It's a cool scene where they're dressed in all black, right? Black and white, or at least Nameless is dressed in all black. Sky's wearing like yellow, but the scene takes place before a drab gray tone background. Sky's mustard yellow, almost like tannish color outfit really stands out against this background. And it's just one of the things that makes this a visually stunning movie. This is something I noticed before, but becomes especially apparent when watching these martial arts films back to back. Hero came out within a few years of some of the other martial arts films that I reviewed, as well as Memoirs of a Geisha. They have somewhat different storylines and themes, but something that connects them is their use of color and very beautiful scenery. Like they're also, based in Asia. In watching the movies, there's also like these small movements that are so dramatized, these little things that the characters do to show off their fighting skills and their capabilities with weapons, swords, bows, arrows, and whatnot. There's this scene late in Hero, or maybe about halfway through the movie, where Nameless is trying to show some of the other would-be assassins just how skilled he is with his sword. And he does this thing of running and flipping around the room, right, that's filled with, it kind of looks like mats, but I feel like it's probably more likely like bundled arrows, right? And he's like swinging a sword. You don't realize until he stops that all of the bundles have been split open. But he does all of this after having thrown a cup of tea up into the air. After cutting open the bundles, he lands ever so gently, catching the cup of tea on the blade of the sword without spilling any of the liquid. These little creative touches of showing off skill and talent that are sprinkled throughout the movie, insane. Another thing that I really enjoyed is you have the story that's taking place on the surface, which is that Nameless has journeyed out into these different territories to defeat the assassins that were hoping to kill the king. But there's the surface level story that's going on, the story that he's telling, and then the deeper story where there's some double crossing, secret alliances that add a bit of intrigue to the story. Most of the main characters are, I don't know what you'd call them, ninjas? Are they ninjas if they're Chinese? I don't know what you would call them. Let's say fighters then. They're out here fighting and whatnot, so they're fighters. But then you have like deeper layers to the story. There's a love story going on between Flying Snow, Broken Sword, and Moon. There's espionage as well. There's all these different things that Hero touches on. I'll say this as someone that has admittedly seen some martial arts films, but is not exactly an aficionado. I do find the more modern films have a bit more depth to them in comparison to some of the earlier martial arts films, where there would have just been like a bunch of fighting and the acting wasn't that great. Whereas here, it's visually stunning, the story's good, the acting is good, and the fighting just helps to kick everything up a notch. I like this kind of stuff. I love movies that are visually stunning. I like action. I like espionage. So the combination of all those different things made this a perfect movie for me. It's jam-packed with all the stuff that I like. And the little creative touches. There's this scene where Nameless cuts open the bundles of, I think it's like arrows, right? But then in another scene, it's like kind of in the same room. He throws all of these black arrows up into the air with one white arrow mixed in between. Amid all of these arrows falling to demonstrate his skill, his precision, he takes his sword to not chop in half, but rather cut through that one white arrow without touching any of the others. Now, obviously, this is fantasy. It's make-believe. But just the idea of putting something like that together to demonstrate his skill, I thought that was cool. Overall, I really like Hero. I don't want to give away too much of the story, but the visuals for me, the story, and how everything comes together was just incredible. It's a movie that you can watch it the first time and you'll be surprised by the double cross and get a good idea of like the plot twists and whatnot. But it's a movie that you can watch a second time and many times thereafter and still thoroughly enjoy because of the action. It's an enjoyable movie. I love action movies like this that aren't just like run in, shoot 'em up without any kind of sense. It's visually stunning. And while it's certainly action-packed, there's a good balance between action, dialogue, story, and visuals. It's a good blend of those different aspects, and it makes for a really enjoyable movie. Thanks for tuning in. To ensure you don't miss any episodes, subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell, and check out my movie review playlist. Go ahead and click the thumbs up button if you like what you saw, and go ahead and share it on social media.